Welcome to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett, where you plus this podcast equals better decisions. I'm Alena Bennett, speaker, author, and leadership expert. I work with chief executive officers and chief financial officers really to help them create universally investable companies where people serve people and the math just works. This week, I'm talking to the incredible Lindsay Hutchinson. But first, here is my What Am I Noticing at the Moment, or WINATM, to help you win at the moment. Now, what I have noticed more recently, and it's a little bit what I've shared previously, but there is a hell of a lot of things going on for a lot of people. I'm not sure if it's the time of the year. You know, we're sitting here in September, so we're kind of almost at the end of the year, but there's still quite a lot of months left. Here in Australia, we have just finished winter. We've just approached spring. So, we're kind of in that everyone's a bit cold, a little bit grey and a little bit, kind of rusty, ready for some warmth. I don't know what it is, but it feels hard for many people right now. And look, I think that's just life. But that said, what I am noticing with all of that, with the challenges, with the hardships, with the frustrations that many people are experiencing, is the power of community and how people and communities are coming together to support one another. And when I mean communities, I don't mean business communities per se. I'm meaning, old friends and colleagues coming out of the woodwork to help, new friends or new acquaintances really just stepping in and saying, how do I help? And what I'm hearing from others that are going through this, and I've also experienced myself recently, it's just incredible that, humans are so willing to kind of step in to help, to show compassion and kindness to others when we're in need. Quite often you kind of wonder, where is this coming from? It's very easy to get a little bit down in the dumps and get all cynical. There's a lot of chaos going on globally at the moment. But, what I have seen firsthand and with the people around me that I work with and I'm friends with is there's so much kindness, compassion, and help out there. And it got me thinking, whilst there is so much compassion, kindness, and love for others when others are in need, do we show that same level of compassion and kindness to ourselves? So I had a moment in the car recently where I was thinking about compassion and what that means to me. And what it means to me and what came to my mind was that idea of being compassionate for others. And I kind of got into that headspace of, thinking about a friend and thinking, don't be too hard on yourself. You're doing the best that you can. And actually you're crushing it given what's going on. And then it hit me. I do not hold that same level of compassion to myself. I would not say I'm self-critical at all, and I'm not being humble. I really wouldn't say that I am critical of myself. But what I would say is I do have high expectations of myself, and that comes from a sense or a place of responsibility. And so I think with that, I don't think I have much self-compassion. So that was a bit of a moment. And then I happened to be messaging a mentee of mine, and she's one of these mentees. I've mentored her for a number of years now. She's one of those mentees that reached out to me and said, would you be my mentor? And it kind of floors you because you think, wow, you're going places. If I can be somewhere in your orbit, that is, that is a privilege. And she was messaging me and we were just talking a little bit about what's going on. And she said to me how her boss had told her recently she needs to be a little bit kinder to herself, not so hard on herself. And so I shared my reflection that I'd had in the car. And I said, actually, I think I'm on a little bit of a journey of self-compassion myself. Maybe we can practice it and go through that together. And she said, I would love that. So anyway, this morning, or last night I had the thought, but this morning I thought, hang on a second, I've got this book that I bought many months ago called Self-Compassion. The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself by Kristen Neff. So I pulled it out and I started it this morning. And, already in the first couple of, in the forward and the first chapter, this is going to be a really useful book for me as I go through this experience or this journey with my mentee. I know that it will be very helpful for her as well. So, I guess in terms of my sort of wrap-up thought-provoking question, the question is, how much compassion do you have for yourself? And then my invitation to you is, who wants to come on this ride with me? Because the more the merrier. There's nothing like that support and accountability of communities. So let me know if you want to come on this journey and learning around self-compassion and growth. Just let me know. And now to our chat with Lindsay. Well, it's an absolute pleasure today to welcome Lindsay Hutchinson, CEO of Eve Health and CHARLI Health. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thanks very much for having me, Alena.
I was so excited to have you on because, obviously we've worked together and we know each other quite well. And I've had the privilege of watching the more recent career trajectory, which has been quite impressive. And I know has blown you and your bosses out of the water a little bit. And I just thought, who could have a really meaningful conversation around the real math of business and some real nuances to that? I immediately thought of you. So thank you so much for being here. What I'd like to start off with is really just giving us a little bit of a sense of your career trajectory, because I think you have seen, and certainly in the last, 3 to 5 years, held roles that give you some really unique perspectives on both sides of the real math of business. If you wouldn't mind sharing your career trajectory, what I'd be interested in is how that shaped your view of success.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, the last probably 5 years has been a little bit of a roller coaster ride. I have been with various different industries over my time. I've done mining, I've done accounting firms, I've done power networks, and I've ultimately landed in healthcare, which I have really found has been my passion project. Over the last 5 years, so I started with Eve Health about 7 years ago now, and started initially as a financial controller. So was walking in there, thought, I'll take a step up. I'd just come back in after having 2 kids, come into a first time back full time into healthcare, and loved it straight away. So getting knee deep into all the finances of Eve and healthcare. And then COVID hit. And so didn't COVID turn us all on our heads? So, it absolutely did that to our business. So at the point that COVID hit, nobody knew what was coming. No one knew what government incentives would be out there, what the industry, well, particularly the healthcare industry, was going to do, given there were so many lockdowns. Surgery had to be shut down for a period of time. That was a really tumultuous time for us. And our business saw a huge period of contraction initially as our first response to what COVID was going to do. And at that point in time, the CEO of the time actually stepped down. And I was left looking around. I had the understanding of the finances of the business. I'd built relationships. I had the trust of the directors of the business for their financial stewardship. And I was asked to basically step up during that period and become their CFO. And that period of time for me was as I said, I was just coming back to the work industry full time. And I had this real moment where I had to go, is this what I'm going to do now? Because it meant a huge change to what I was expecting my role to be. But I also looked at it and went, well, if I'm capable of leading this business, if I feel like I've got the relationships and the background to lead this business through this time of huge uncertainty, it kind of felt like it was my responsibility to do that. And so that was my turning point where I went, yep, I'm doing this. I'm stepping into the CFO role, and I am going to lead our business the way it needs to be led through this period of change. And so that was me for a couple of years. The business didn't actually replace the CEO at that time, so I just stepped into what we called the CFO role because we just didn't know what was coming. Yeah. And so I continued in that role, and then ultimately 2 years ago, I stepped into the CEO role officially. I probably didn't feel as much change in that role as a lot of people do, stepping from CFO to CEO, purely because I didn't have that layer above me in a CEO capacity for a while. So yes, then I continued as CEO of Eve Health, and it was probably the real penny drop moment for me in that was realising no one else is coming to help me do this gig. Like this is me now. And that was a real point that in that changeover from CFO to CEO that I went, I need to get myself some backing and some great minds such as yourself to help me through this, because we all have blind spots. We don't all know what our blind spots are, but it was really vital and critical for me at that point to have other people that knew what they were doing as my sounding boards, because being in healthcare, I didn't have anyone financial or CEO minded to bounce things off.
Yeah. And let's talk about, I think that's really interesting. I've got so many questions that you've raised already, but also maybe it's pertinent at this point just to congratulate you on that journey, because, you know, you've just shared a time frame of, you know, the last 5 to 6 years. And as you say, it was a tumultuous time for every single person. But I think layering on to that thinking of, I'm coming back into the workforce full time. I've got 2 young children. That in and of itself is a huge step, to then be facing a global pandemic and a huge promotion, like all of those things. And what I love most about that story, or about your experience, Lindsay, is that, and I wrote this down, you asked yourself the question, is this what I'm going to do right now? And what that demonstrates to me is real intentionality. And then your response to asking yourself that very good question was, well, I have the capability, and so it is my responsibility. And again, I just think that shows an incredible sense of intentionality, but also that stewardship for the business, which you didn't have to take that on, but you did. And so well done. And I'm so pleased that you've had that progress and you've had that growth that you deserve. So I just want to sort of take the time to say congratulations.
Thank you
on
very
that.
much.
But let's talk about the nuance of trying to operate a business in the healthcare industry, and also report to directors who are medical professionals and genuinely focused on patient care, which is obviously, we all want our doctors to focus on patient care. I know that your journey has not only been one of huge exponential growth for yourself as, you know, financial controller to CFO to CEO, but you have also needed to take your bosses, directors, doctors through an education journey in and of itself. I'd be interested just to hear how those conversations have gone, the pushback that you might have received and all the rest of it, because what I know about, you know, my dad's a doctor, he's always been in the public healthcare system, so we have some very interesting conversations around where healthcare sits with profit and money. But I know number one is all about the patient. And I imagine that is the case as well for your directors. So I'd love to hear the stories around how those conversations have gone, where there has been pushback, and what ultimately cuts through with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the board have gone through a huge amount of growth in the last 5 years alongside me. As you said, they're incredibly focused. Their number one focus is doing the right thing by the patient. And our business is the why for all of us is we're all there for the patient. I think what's really important, not just for the directors, but also for everyone else in our business, is that our values are all aligned with the business's values. And it's a lot easier to do in healthcare because, you know, we all know why we're there. And when things go off track a little bit, we can always bring it back to patient care is our foundation. And so, yes, we've had some really deep conversations over the time because, as I said, when I first started, the directors were all about their clinical care, but they were also business owners. And the outset, they weren't always quite across what our business was doing. So part of my role has been bringing them along the journey as well to understand what the business is doing outside of the clinical care of patients. Obviously, that's number one, but they need to understand as well the financial health of their business, and they need to understand when the patient journey potentially is not elevated to the standard that it needs to be, and where I guess sometimes costs may increase, but where we can't always be looking at the bottom line when it comes to the patient outcome and the patient journey, and keeping them on that same page so that they all understand what the end goal is, I suppose, and why. So, for example, you know, we have had to align with partners along the way that are able to really satisfy our number one goal of giving the patient the best outcome that they possibly can. And our partnerships are really important to that. It's not just how our business operates in a silo, but who we rely on as part of each touch point along that journey as well.
I think it's interesting, healthcare, financial health, and this idea that sometimes to give the level of patient care that we want, it's going to cost money. How do those conversations play out? I mean, I imagine they're fairly robust because we're not just talking about the fact that there might be a cost, and then to get to the level of patient care you guys stand by, it actually costs this much. Yeah. We're not only talking about that distinction, but as you mentioned, they're business owners as well. So I imagine this becomes very personal. This is quite complex because it's not just a corporation that has a pool of money for the corporation. We are talking about a group of business owners. I'm certainly not asking you to sort of breach any sense of confidentiality, but I'd love to get from your perspective just how what that tension sounds like, maybe the tactics or the things that you've had to deal with to get them through that education process.
Absolutely. We've got a relatively large board. And when you've got that many people on a board and who are also owners within the business, you're always going to have different personalities. And something that actually you taught me, Alena, early on, and which has actually been transformational to my relationship with everyone, is being able to relate to those people on an individual basis and understand what are their drivers, what makes them tick. So something that we did very early on was an empathy mapping exercise. And I remember. Still go back to that because that has actually been something that I've used not just for our board, but for everyone within the business, because it helps you understand what makes them tick. And then you can actually go to them with the information that satisfies their need for an outcome, and tailor the information to them the way they need to digest it. And so that for me has been really critical because for all of our board, everyone wants to stretch themselves as far as they can stretch for the greater good of the patient. And that's where some of our discussions, well, that's actually where CHARLI Health came from, was the fact that we all got together and they said, at the moment, we are limited by the number of hours in the day. We can't treat rural and remote patients. We can't go interstate. We've tried to go interstate, but you've got to find partners, again, that have the same philosophy as you and that operate in the same way. So part of that discussion was, how do we get that broader reach to be able to treat the maximum number of people and impact the maximum number of people that we possibly can? And that's where the CHARLI Health platform came in, because it is an application. It's an app that patients can access virtual care through. We've got built-in medical AI so that people can get actual answers to their medical questions rather than going to Dr. Google. And it's all backed by our clinicians, but that was their way of being able to get that reach and be able to do something in a physically reasonable way and a cost-effective way as well.
Wow. How awesome. I even love that distinction. And again, I'm guessing that you are pivotal in these conversations. I love that distinction, or the relationship between everyone in your board and everyone in the organisation, quite frankly, has a personal interest and investment in what was solely Eve Health. But you were all there for the greater good of the patient. And I really love that because, again, healthcare is something that I think we can all relate to. And we can all relate to that, well, I have a personal interest, but fundamentally we want a healthcare system that cares for the greater good. And, that I would say actually is a big challenge for most organisations who have some sort of purpose-led mission that they're on. What sort of innovation or thinking led you to an app as a way to solve those problems? We've just talked about you coming out of the pandemic, and that was a very hard time. You went through that period of contraction. There was significant change and growth at the, I'll say executive level, but even that almost was yourself, but also at the board level. You have acknowledged the significant or tremendous amount of growth the board has gone through in that same period of time. You've then sort of, what sounds to me like, started to transform your industry by reaching, the masses. How did you get to that?
One thing about women's health as well is that, well, not all of women's health, but looking at obstetric care, for example, private obstetric care is significantly changing at the moment. So what was a really robust private system is starting to contract a little bit. And as we can probably all imagine, the work-life balance of an obstetrician is not amazing. And so it's hard to always attract new doctors into the rooms. So we have been we're very demand driven at the moment.
Yeah.
And we were struggling to be able to satisfy that demand with the number of doctors that we had. And as I said, the doctors wanted to do more and more and more, but there's only so many hours in the day. And that's where we went into really questioning, how can we do this better? How can we reach more? One of our nurses had also done a research paper that had a look at the validity of the apps that are on the market at the moment. And she did this a few years ago, but looking at the outcomes that were coming from the apps and how effective they were in being accurate in their timing of things. She found that the results were not ideal at that point in time. So the accuracy of, fertility tracking applications and things like that, they just weren't as accurate as they could be. And that's where we went. We're also an educational facility. So, we have been known over the 15 years of Eve Health to educate a lot of doctors coming through and then set them on their path. And so everyone looked at it and went, we've got the skills behind this. Again, we owe this to the healthcare industry to actually build something that we can stand behind, that uses the validated instruments that we use within clinical day-to-day care, and make a product that can surpass what's out there at the moment.
That's fascinating. You are for profit, right?
Yes.
Yet what I'm hearing through this is you are an organisation of highly purpose-driven, single purpose-driven individuals.
Absolutely.
And even this idea that we owe it to the industry to share our expertise, instead of, you and I both know organisations that keep it to themselves. It's all our IP. We must keep it to ourselves because we want to make sure we're always at the top of the food chain, sort of thing. Yet I'm listening to this thinking, wow, we have an organisation that wants to partner with the industry, has the, I guess, additional challenge of, we are not just doctors that work for an organisation, we are business owners. So there's that real direct link when it comes to money, yet we are here for the patient. And actually, we're not just here for the patient, we're here for the industry. I mean, that's phenomenal. And I have this conversation all the time with CFOs and CEOs of not-for-profits. You need to make money in order for the business to be around for decades to come. How has the money metrics worked for Eve? So, and I guess maybe what I'm questioning, Eve Health and CHARLI Health, and I guess what I'm asking is not so much how the money has gone, but how I'm imagining there's certain periods of volatility, and you've got that challenge of the short term versus the long term. I'm hearing from this conversation, I'm hearing that in the spirit of being truly purpose driven and wanting to drive the industry to step up, excel, and have maximum impact and reach, that's a very long term vision.
Absolutely.
Right? But yet we all fall into the trap of, what happened this month, what happened this year, all the rest of it. I'd just love to know how those conversations go, or what are the tensions that you've experienced, and how do you get over those tensions and that complexity of, and maybe this is less so as the CEO, despite the fact that you were a CFO wearing a CEO hat as well. So I'm not sure if this is more sitting in that CFO seat, but how do you kind of go back and forth? Sometimes it can be a bit of a pendulum, the people and money paradigm. Just be curious how that plays out for Eve Health and CHARLI Health.
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting because they're obviously completely different business models. So
Yeah.
Eve Health, bricks and mortar, financial sustainability is the name of the game. It's
Yeah.
keeping an even keel, keeping the ship upright and going forth, because everyone is pretty happy with where things are sitting in terms of our balance of cost versus service provided.
Yep. Yeah.
CHARLI Health is a completely different kettle of fish. It is a tech startup. It is in its first 18 months of life. It's a journey to get it out there. This can be a product for every woman and AFAB individual out there. It's got a long way to go. And keeping people along that journey to realise that, we're not going to turn this remarkable profit in 12 months. And that's completely normal. Like, we would be really unusual if we could manage to do that.
Yeah.
But I guess we're sort of reaching that precipice now where it's one thing to bring everyone along the journey for it, but there's a tipping point where you've got to go, okay, we actually need to go wider than ourselves now, and we need to go and seek investment. And keeping people on that, I guess it's a big discussion between reducing your own ownership stake and when do you need that investment from outside sources. And that's a very interesting discussion that this group haven't actually had to think about before, because Eve Health has been its own entity.
Yes. How fascinating. Like, I'm just thinking, and, I remember when this CHARLI Health was literally like just a speck of the imagination, and it was exciting, and, you could see the potential, and your mind, even back then, was being blown. I remember those conversations, and how do I go from my experience being bricks and mortar to suddenly being in tech startup? Like, how does that even work? The personal and professional growth that all of you must be going on is remarkable. And I guess that's what's so exciting about business, isn't it? Is that, if you think about you and your career and how you started, and now you're suddenly playing in a tech startup world as a CEO, you probably never imagined that in your future. Think about a doctor and all that their training. Suddenly they're thinking about, raising money, investments, dilution of ownership, and all of those things. Like, this is just remarkable. Do you ever have those moments as a board where you just kind of go, what's going on here? Like, how did we get to this point? And, I can imagine in moments of vulnerability, you'd all be kind of scratching your head and going, are we on track?
Absolutely. Oh, and we have those conversations often. I had a conversation with one of them the other day where I actually had to say to them, so Eve Health, absolutely. It's a clinical organisation. CHARLI Health, yes, we've got the underpinnings of the medical profession, and we're a medical app. But ultimately, it's a mindset shift to say, actually, we're a tech startup. We're not a medical company. And those are two very different business propositions. And it was exactly that moment where they went, oh, my God, you're right. We're playing in the wrong space.
I'll come back to the statement that you made at the beginning, where you asked yourself the question, is this what I'm going to do now? I can imagine, like, I'm not a doctor, but I can imagine when you are a doctor, you hold on to that identity so tight. So for someone to suddenly say, oh, no, you do tech startup, like, that's, whilst it's great and the purpose is right, there must have been moments where they were looking at themselves in the mirror going, who does that mean I am now?
And what does that mean we have to do now? Why? I mean, they're very comfortable in the relationships that they have and the persona that they have. And all of a sudden, I'm saying to them, that's great. Keep those relationships, but you need to build relationships with a whole different industry now. And that doesn't always sit comfortably.
Well, the question that comes to my mind, Lindsay, is, has anyone opted out? Or do you get a sense that people might opt out? Because I have this conversation all the time with clients, and, you talked about the bringing people along the journey and all the rest of it. And I think there comes a point where we all get old and ugly enough to go, you know what, this is not a bus I want to be on anymore. And that's okay, right? That's totally okay. But yeah, when you outline the trajectory and that change in identity and who I need to be talking to and the types of conversations I need to be having, it would be totally acceptable for people to say, I don't want to be in this game. I mean, have any of those conversations come up or happened?
Yeah, I mean, we have gone through a period of intense growth. So, CHARLI, while it's only been around 18 months, we have gone fast. We have gone full pelt at development, at trying to get ourselves out there. Some of those conversations have happened early on in that,
Yeah, right.
you know, where are we going? What is our strategy? Because we can't be everything for everyone all at once. And
Yes.
that was the first really difficult conversation of saying, we need to focus and do one thing really, really well. Then we can tag on the other things. But let's just get one thing and nail it. So that was probably our first difficult conversation because everyone's got a different idea of who they want to be and for whom they want to be it for.
Yes.
And then you add on this extra layer of you're not just a doctor in this.
Oof.
And when I say just a doctor, I mean
No.
no disrespect by that, but
100%.
you've got so many hats in this space.
Yes.
And we're asking them to take on new skills at a time when they're already at 100% capacity.
Yes.
And that's another difficult conversation. So I guess in answer to your question, I see people not bowing out, but certainly taking a little bit of a step back and going, I'll do the technical stuff. I'll do the doctoring. I'll do the clinical side of things.
Yes.
And then giving the opportunity to others to step up and get out there. So I guess we're sort of all trying to play to our strengths.
Yeah, I mean, not all doctors have everyone's got a slight difference or an edge. So that's great. If that's the outcome, that's a really great outcome. You mentioned about wearing different hats, and you've got me thinking around, and this is more a philosophical question for you, given your experience, people's roles. You and I both know from observing other people, particularly a role like a doctor. It's very specialised and, you know, not every doctor needs to be a specialist, but you have to do certain things to become a doctor and you need to continue to do certain things. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's any such thing anymore of I'm just going to be a thing? Or do you think we've come to a place in business now where you just have to wear many hats and that is just the job?
I think it has absolutely morphed into that. Particularly, I mean, we're not a huge business. We're a medium-sized business and a small business for CHARLI. Particularly in those size businesses, I think everyone is wearing a lot of hats. And everyone has to have different strengths than what previously they had to. I mean, in a finance role back when I first started, you could sit at your desk and you could do your spreadsheets and just be really focused on that one thing. Whereas even when I started as financial controller, it was all about building those relationships. Finance, I think, has been given a lot more of a priority than what it used to in times past. And that's because we are wearing the hats and we are doing the relationship building as well. We're doing business partnering throughout every one of our finance roles, I think. And that seems to now be a prerequisite.
Yeah.
I think the other thing about wearing many hats, and someone said this to me the other day, and I've sort of stepped back and thought about it, and it's really resonated with me, that particularly when you're starting up a new business and you're wearing all of those hats, the downside of that is that you can be the bottleneck because you're trying to plug every hole, but everyone is relying on your input to continue going. And I think definitely when you're in a particularly small business, that's a risk. And it's a risk that you've got to be able to acknowledge when it occurs and find a path forward or some way to manage that. Because I look at it now and I'm like, yeah, I can see how I am a bottleneck, particularly in the CHARLI business, because I'm trying to, you know, stretch across everything. But it's something to be conscious of.
You've talked a lot about people, you've talked a lot about empathy and really identifying what makes people tick. And then, you know, you've talked about trust. I'm just really curious around what do you think the key ingredients or success factors that have given you the opportunity to have the breadth of experiences and success that you've had? You know, what's been the Lindsay Hutchinson recipe of success?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. I think I have been incredibly lucky with the teams that I've had around me. I think having their values aligned with not just my values, but with the business's values as well. I think we all come to work each day with the same, why am I doing this? And
Mm,
that has meant that everyone is really dedicated. They all have the clarity of mind of what are they there for. And I think that
mm,
really is where the magic happens because
yes.
everyone's pushing in the same direction. I mean, it's never perfect. It's not like you don't have bumps in the road with that, but
Mm,
I
yeah.
honestly think the team that I have around me have enabled me to be able to do these roles that I've had the opportunity to step into. If I didn't
Mm,
have their framework around me of great people that
yeah.
believe in the same thing, I don't think I could have done what I have done.
It's interesting that you just said, it's not always it doesn't always happen perfectly. And I'm glad you said that because, you paint a very positive picture. And I know that's your nature as well. But, I think about this has not come easy for you. The amount of times you and I spoke and the hours that you were working were very, very long and continuously long. And with all the change going on as well, and unpredictability, because we cannot plan when a baby is going to come. And even in the few conversations that I had with your directors, it would be, we get them if we can, but if they need to be delivering a baby or what have you, so be it. So you deal in a very volatile circumstance just because of the nature of what you do. So I'm glad that you acknowledge that it isn't rosy all of the time, because I think that's an important, just to make it real. This is not easy. This comes out of grit, determination in it. But as I think you've rightly pointed out, clarity of minds that we're here for a really purposeful reason and we are aligned there. I ask the next question on behalf of all of the people that are listening to this going, oh, that just sounds all too good to be true. I'll take the persona of someone who said, oh, we had this brilliant strategy day and I got all the team aligned and everyone's on the bus. And now I'm hearing that someone might not be. Lindsay, what do I do in that situation? I'm sure that has arisen at times because has not been a perfect journey for you. So what do you do?
In our periods of time where we have had, I guess, not everyone aligned, we've had to regroup again. Because for me, I am very much an open book. Like, I want people to come and say, I see what you're selling. I'm not buying it. That's not
Yeah.
where my head's at. We need to be going left and you're going right. I want people to
Yes.
speak up and to say that is the case because then we can deal with it. We can chat it through. It could be that they're right and they're seeing something that the rest of us haven't seen and that we need to
Yes.
regroup and rework that strategy. My thing is, don't be afraid to take a pause and regroup, because if you go too far down one path without having considered all the factors, you can spend a lot of money doing it, a lot of time doing it, and then find you've actually gone the wrong direction completely. So my thing would be, don't be afraid to just pause and reflect. And I think sort of what you mentioned, Eleanor, as well, of it's not always rosy. Absolutely not. I have been in healthcare for, as I said, 7 years now, but it's very easy for me to forget that I didn't used to work in the same way as I do now. We've had many conversations where I've said, look, I will get phone calls from 6 o'clock in the morning till 8 p.m. at night, but I might get nothing from 9 a.m. till 12 p.m. because they're back-to-back consulting. And so I often gloss over the fact that my routines and my rigor had to completely change when I came into healthcare. And it took me a long time to get there because I've got an accountant mindset that does a timesheet and it ticks off every time in the day.
Yes.
And I felt guilty taking time for myself in that 8:30 till 5 o'clock time slot, even though I was still taking phone calls at these extreme ends of the day.
Yeah.
And I think having that mindset change and not being quite so rigid, that was a journey for me in itself.
I remember having that conversation with one of your in one of our conversations with your directors, but I also remember having to plan a conversation with a director, and because we were kind of at the drawing board going, how do we get them? They're so busy, they're so unpredictable. And I think we did come up with some ungodly hour well outside the 9 till 5. And we went, and I kind of went, would you just try and contact them then? And you went, I guess I've got to. And it worked. But I know, I think it's nice to hear that, because it kind of does sound so simple. Right? I think it's helpful that you acknowledge that really changing your mindset around what work looks like, not only in your context, but I think it's also part of that leadership journey, right? Particularly from, when you start to hit that C-suite, you are expected to be available different hours, and you are expected to take the time in the normal business hours when you need it. So I'm really pleased you acknowledged it. We could have a whole conversation around that, couldn't we?
Absolutely. And I mean, we've spoken so much about what does a CEO's workday even look like? Like, there's that's a whole day's worth of conversation of, doing the busy work versus what you need to do strategically, but it doesn't necessarily look like sitting at your desk. And
no, it very rarely does.
Exactly. and that I probably found that was one of my biggest mindset shifts of, it's okay if I'm not doing this sitting in front of a computer.
Fascinating. We might have to get you back and have that conversation. Now, it would be remiss of me to not talk about AI, because you did mention AI and how that was built into the app, into the CHARLI Health app. People have so many differing opinions around AI, and certainly AI that gives advice.
Yeah.
I'd love to know very briefly, how you overcame that, not how you did it. I expect that's proprietary, but just sort of how you overcame the mindset around that and any resistance that you may have experienced bringing AI into the front-facing part of what you do as opposed to the back end.
So the way we've got around it with CHARLI, and the way that it sits more comfortably with people, is, so we, as I mentioned earlier, we use these clinically validated instruments that the doctors use every day. So as part of the app, people are tracking their symptoms and things like that on a day-to-day basis as they need to. And the AI sits in the background and will just flag, something might not be quite right, provide some information on what they might want to look into with their healthcare provider. But what we've also got is we've got the backing of a virtual clinic there, so that we can say, hey, maybe think about these things that the AI has detected, or a patient can ask a question directly to the AI and it can give the answer, or what it thinks might be the answer, but then link it through to a clinician who can talk to them virtually through the app as well. So we've kind of tried to keep the comfort level of there, while we've got the AI that's doing a lot of the groundwork and having a look at lots of these instruments in the background and doing its AI thing. We've got the physical person there able to give them that verbal, I think you're right. I think this might be something that's not quite right. Yeah. And that's how we've balanced it out.
And again, I'll come back to what you said as we start to round out this really incredible conversation. You talk about, it's about really dealing with one person, each individual, what makes them tick from a, patient perspective. What do they need at an individual level? And obviously AI gets them part of the way, but that fundamentally, given what you do, there's a comfort level that every patient on the other end of an app, or even on the other end of a consult, wants that comfort level of a human. And actually, now I say those things out loud, Lindsay, maybe one of the things that we might use as a way to wrap up this conversation, cheekily, the question that I wanted to ask is, now you've done bricks and mortar and now you've done tech startup, what do you prefer?
Yeah.
Do you know the answer to that?
I don't, because they're so different, and they both have brilliant things going for them. So I find that really difficult to answer.
And I think it's great that you don't have to
Yes.
choose. You know, this is an and situation. So note that that's great. But I guess maybe just to kind of wrap that up, maybe if you can sort of step above the parapet and share with us as a way to close out the conversation, what are the things that are so embedded in both, that are the same, that are common to both, that deliver the success? That regardless of bricks and mortar, well established to startup tech, you know, very innovative, you know, what are those common themes when we think about, you know, the real math of business, when we think about what success looks like and sustainable success, what are the common themes that you see across both of them that are working for Eve Health and CHARLI Health?
I would go as far as to say it comes down to one thing, and that is having a team around you that's aligned in your vision, and the vision of, well, not just my vision, but the vision of the business. And I keep talking about the why, but having a similar why. Why do I turn up to work? Why do I want to work diligently and support this business and the issues that come through it? I really do think that when everyone is aligned, at least in their purpose, that is when the magic can happen. And financial sustainability comes from that, because everyone is working together, but they also recognise that it's a business and that we've got to make that work.
So I have heard you say multiple times it comes down to one thing, one person. I love that, because business is extraordinarily complex and continues to get more complex. So I think there's a real skill that you possess to keep bringing it back to one thing. So, you know, I just thought I would share that with you.
Thank you.
You know, there's a part of me that's going, I wouldn't be surprised, Lindsay, if you get a lot of people reaching out saying, how do I come and work for Eve Health or CHARLI Health? But I think the takeaway from a business perspective is, you know, when you've got that alignment around the vision and around the purpose, and your team share that, it actually doesn't matter what kind of business, what style of business, what shape, size, etc. When you've got the right people around you, you will deliver a business that delivers or can sustain financial success.
Absolutely.
So, Lindsay, with that in mind, if anyone wanted to reach out to you to learn more about Eve Health, CHARLI Health, or even more about your journey as an executive, how would they best do that?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is probably the best place for me. I'm always on there. So, just looking me up under Lindsay Hutchinson.
Wow. Thank you so much for your time today, Lindsay. This has been remarkable. I never know what's going to come of the conversation. And despite the fact that you and I know each other and have worked together for years, I have learned so much more about you, but also sort of about the business and the success factors through this. I'm so grateful for your time, but also I love how you've shared your generosity of sharing in that level of detail, how that often perceived tension between healthcare and money, how that's worked for you. I think that's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Lindsay. That's been wonderful.
Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
That's good. I love it. Awesome. Thanks, Lindsay. See you soon.
Bye.
And what a great chat with Lindsay. Thank you so much. This leads us right into our listener question. And remember, if you want to submit a listener question, you can leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and we'll hopefully bring it into a future episode. So today's listener question is from Cameron. Hi, Cameron. Hi, Alena. Loving the show. My question is about the human side of business. It seems like some of the moments that made you start thinking about the real math of business were lighthearted and positive. You mentioned your story about working with the Irish guy who was able to use charm to help bring people together. I was wondering if there were any other moments like that stand out to you. Thank you, Cameron. Great question, Cameron. And yeah, there have been other moments. And I guess what I will say is they're not all positive. Obviously, the lighthearted and positive stories are great, but, you know, we all wear the battle scars. And I think sometimes it's those scars that really shape things. You know, I mentioned my boss back in the States, the Irish guy, as you refer to. I remember the dissonance that I felt when I came back from the States, when I came back from working in San Francisco to working in Sydney. In San Francisco, I had a huge amount of autonomy where I could work when I want, where I wanted, as long as I delivered the outcome. Yeah. And when I moved back to Sydney, I was treated as a nobody. All of the experience that I had working with listed companies in the States was kind of lost on everybody. And I needed to put my bum on the seat to prove that I was working. Yeah. What I noticed in myself based on that experience is I was thinking, hang on a second, this is not positively impacting my work. I can do better work when I've got more autonomy. And there's so much that I can give to my work that I'm not able to with this level or with this style of leadership. And so I think, yes, I was certainly shaped by seeing the positive experience of that leader, but then, almost immediately contrasted that when I came back and I was led by some leaders that were not so good, I'll say. And I thought, hang on, if this is going on for me, I bet you this is going on for everyone. So, I think there are positive and not so positive experiences that have started to shape how I feel about the real math of business. I think if I lift up a little bit more, one of my clients does people and math really well. I think from what we've just heard from Lindsay, Eve Health and CHARLI Health are also doing that quite well. But I've had the privilege of walking alongside one of my other clients, their companies, for almost 6 years. So I've seen them ride the wave of business, including through the pandemic where they had to fully shut down the business for weeks and, tell their staff, don't come to work. We'll let you know when to come back in. Now, this company is truly people first. That does not mean that they don't have difficult conversations. They risk not meeting deadlines. They miss targets, but they don't shy away from that. They lean into those conversations, those robust conversations. And I think the most important thing, because they have that people first mindset, is driven from the top at the board level. Those conversations are not easy. They are certainly robust, but they are had, and I think there are many companies where that conversation, we're not going to meet a deadline, we're not going to meet a target, that conversation cannot even be had. What's made me think about the real math of business? It's the positive stories, it's the negative stories, and it's seeing those companies that are able to find their version of balance in the pendulum that is the money and math pendulum. But I guess one final point, Cameron, I'll share with you a little bit more holistically is that I get to see the impact of stress on all the CFOs and CEOs that I work with. The source of that stress can either be people or money. When it's a money problem stress, how does that manifest? It manifests itself in being short with people, micromanaging, all of those kind of what we call red behaviors, they come out. And a people problem stress, it manifests itself in wasted time and energy worrying about the said issue. As a result, that impacts decision-making, productivity, which subsequently impacts the bottom line. And that's all without even talking about that big, hairy concept of layoffs and redundancies. I'm not even going to touch that right now. So again, I'll come back to seeing that at an individual level from people that sit at the very top of the corporate hierarchy. And I just think there is, and then you multiply that by the number of staffs. There is an inexplicable or inextricable, probably, link between people and money. And I think those companies that do that well, that can balance that tension, well, are those that are not only here now, but they will be here for the long term because they can balance not only the balance between the people and the money and that real math of business, but they have that ability to balance and manage the dualities that are everywhere in business, but certainly that short-term demands versus long-term vision. Cameron, I hope that gives you a little bit more food for thought, a little bit more context around, what this idea of real math of business is and the source of it and where it's going. I really appreciate your comment or your question. And I want to thank you all for listening to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett. If you liked this episode, remember to subscribe for more content and stay on top of the real math of business. I've been Alena Bennett. Thanks so much for listening.